Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's up? Welcome in GC Live Wednesday episode of the show. Officially moving on to Mizzou Gamecocks. It feels like a quick turnaround for some reason, Chris. It's obviously the same distance. This is not a Thursday night football game. There's nothing remotely weird about the timing of this game. It just feels like a quick turnaround because I think that last game was just so draining for South Carolina fans. There was so much to kind of take in and process, I think. And, for South Carolina, they're going to have, I think, moved on from this past game a lot quicker than everybody else because clearly it's going to be tough enough to beat Missouri, even if you're not thinking about the last game. And so you got to recover. You got to move forward. We'll see if South Carolina can do that and play a good ball game in the other Columbia. Before we get into all that, South Carolina's coordinators, all three of them speaking today. So we'll have some takes on all that. And just maybe a few big picture takes as well from what we saw against Florida that could be maybe noteworthy or newsworthy moving forward. First, we'll tell you about our friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933. Like we tell you pretty much every single day. If you need more information, go to clint.hammond.com. That's what I'm doing right now. It's got all of his information right there. He is located at 3300 Millwood Avenue, Columbia, right across from Dreher High School. NMLS number 71597. Cell phone number 803-422-6797. Clint is dedicated to answering any and all your questions. How much home can you afford? What's the right mortgage for you? What's your payment going to be? Clint will walk you through that process and make it very, very simple. One of our other great sponsors we have, who is partially responsible for this show, I should say, is Game Time. That's gametime.co, the Game Time app. And here's what I need you to do. If you're going to go to a sporting event, going to go to a concert, going to go to a comedy show, and it is sold out, you're looking for tickets, you're looking for great deals on a ticket, get the Game Time app, or you can just go to gametime.co. You can search for anything. You see South Carolina football right there. Wow, South Carolina, Missouri, a tough ticket right now as the Missouri Tigers are rolling, having a big year for their standards. You can hit slide to unlock a flash deal like I just did, Chris. You can get 10% off right here instantly, and also limited time only. If you're a new customer, if you've never used the Game Time app before, go to the settings, throw in the code Gamecocks, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. There are certainly things that apply to that, but if it's your first time, $20 off. Again, Game Time app, gametime.co. As the show goes on, we will tell you a little bit more about some of our other great sponsors, but I'm going to try something a little different and just kind of knock out a couple of the sponsors right off the bat so that we can just keep our flow going later on. Chris, like I said, all coordinators speaking today. As always, middle of the week, there's a little bit of look back to Florida. There's a little bit of big picture talk, and there's a little bit of look ahead to Missouri. Let's start offense because we always do. Single biggest take from Dow Loggins, South Carolina's offensive coordinator.
Well, here's where my mind went, Wes. And it's a little bit more specific. So when it comes to the run game, right, we all saw that Mario Anderson battled through an ankle injury and finished up, 2 yards short of having a 100-yard game. He had a really good game, overall. I think everybody could be pleased with, some of the things that you saw in the run game. Even though the protection wasn't perfect, Wes, we certainly saw, I think, a better protection performance than we have seen in games past. And one of the big reasons for that was some of the tweaks they made on the offensive line. And I thought it was interesting that Dowell Loggins noted that they were able to not only perform better, but make some schematic changes with the run game in part, or really tied to wholly, the changes that they made up front. And what I mean by that, and Shane Beamer pointed this out too, if you go back and look at that game, Wes, they ran more gap scheme plays, meaning instead of, inside outside zone, which was still in the playbook, which we still saw, they also ran, some counter, some power looks. We saw more of those gap scheme style plays. If you're unfamiliar with gap scheme style plays, South Carolina ran a lot of them when Kevin Harris had his big year, right? So I personally love them, Wes. I just like watching it. I think it's neat to watch. I remember some of those days with Kevin Harris. But South Carolina didn't feel early in the year like they were as equipped to run it. So they made a couple tweaks. One was obviously they kicked Vershawn Lee out to right tackle, and that was in part to stabilize another tackle spot. Of course, he went down with an injury. He's now questionable for Saturday. But they also inserted Trey Jones into the lineup. And so they felt with their two guards, with Trey Jones, with Trovon Ball, they felt like those were guys that could move, number one, and number two, move people. And so that gave Loggins the confidence to kind of change some things up in the run game, which I really do think helped them against Florida, Wes. You scored that many points in that football game. Not a perfect offensive performance, but a good one overall. So to bring it all back home, here's the question. Do you continue down that path, right? Because now you've got one of those offensive linemen is questionable in Vershawn Lee. And now you've also got a situation where Mario Anderson is at the bare minimum, banged up going into the Missouri game.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to keep trying to do some of those things, man, because defenses and you're always walking the line as an offense between doing too much or doing not enough in terms of you want to do enough to keep the defense guessing, but on offense you want to do little enough that you work on the same things over and over and over enough to where you're executing it at an extremely high level. And so it felt like not just for personnel reasons to me, and I want to say Beamer or Loggins even made this comment at some point early in the year. It felt like they really cut down on their number of run plays that they were actually running and said, look, we need to execute a couple of these before we can even consider executing 5 or 10 different types of run plays. And that's something I think when you're struggling, Chris, you kind of maybe feel like you have to do, but ultimately you got to have a little bit of versatility. You got to be a little bit multiple with what you do. And because these teams, if they know exactly what your two kind of run concepts are, they're eventually going to just kind of sell out and stop it. So I think you made the point on one of the shows, like that was something Florida probably didn't have on film a whole lot. Probably wasn't something that they had repped a ton in practice. And you're not reinventing the wheel. I'm sure they easily could go to the sideline and say, hey, this is like what this team did. You guys know how to defend this, but still in that moment, you bust a long run, Juju McDowell, a touchdown run off a gap scheme. You bust a tight end screen catch and run for touchdown off of a fake counter, I think, if I remember correctly, complete with spin move from Spencer Rattler. So, they kind of attach some of these things and put in some complementary things to where some of these plays were run off of each other, basically, which I thought was good. And it just gives your line a little bit more of a chance. But certainly, and they talked about this on the broadcast, they liked Trey Jones' ability, as sort of that puller, is that guy who can get out and get ahead of steam and create some room. And then Troy Ball, I mean, dude, for a freshman, every time I just sort of focus on him, I'm a little bit reminded every time, like, this is a wide-bodied kid. Like, he looks the way you want an SEC guard to look on the offensive line. Not to get too far off this exact topic, but I'm pretty excited to see what a Troy Ball and a Tree Babalade look like, a year from now with all this experience that they're getting. So, it was a nice mix, a nice blend of, inserting Trey Jones was kind of one of the catalysts here, but you have some just veterans in there in Nick G and then Vershawn Lee, and then blending them with the young guys. The fact that Troy Ball has his best game of the year with Vershawn Lee beside him for half of the game. So I think, unfortunately for South Carolina, Vershawn Lee his status is up in the air for this week. It felt to me like they found something, Chris.
They did. They found it for about a half, and then unfortunately you're right back to square one where you're down so many offensive linemen. And what was it, Wes, maybe a couple of weeks ago where Shane Beamer pointed out that they were down something like 7 offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't counted it up lately, but certainly it's still near that number, if not more. And I was actually talking, Wes, with a guy in the coaching industry last night. That affects your practice depth, right? Like, people just think about going to as long as you have 5, go into the game, just roll the ball out there, you'll be fine. It makes it more difficult to field a good scout team, to do good on good work, when you are that many guys down. And I think I have to constantly remind myself, and that's why I remind all our listeners, our watchers too. This is a team that now, Wes, in the Florida game, they had, and fact check me on this. I mean, there were 0 players that started in the same spot from the North Carolina game to the Florida game, because even Nick Gargiulo and Vershawn Lee switched spots, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your entire starting 5 in terms of your personnel and your positions from UNC to Florida were different. You don't see that a lot, right? And despite all the injuries, your projected starter at left tackle that you didn't even have at the beginning of the year, your right tackle that won the job going into the UNC game and played about 4 snaps, right? All that stuff that happened and all the inconsistencies and problems, and you still feel like in that first half you probably played your best game on the O-line, probably of the entire year, and then you have the Vershawn Lee injury. So it's unfortunately been kind of par for the course where this position's just been so hard hit with injuries. Now, if you can get Vershawn Lee back, if you can at some point in the next few weeks, can you get Kason Henry back to at least have more depth, if not more, right? Man, if you could just get healthy at that position. But the changes that they made, I think credit where credit's due, they did seem to work for the purposes of this game, or half of the game, Wes.
Yeah, and I don't think this was a dominant Florida defense coming in, man, but this was not would you have been surprised going into the game based on what we've seen, South Carolina's, some of their struggles up front, if I just blindly said, hey, South Carolina had a few big plays on offense, but they just couldn't consistently get anything going because Florida just beat them up front, couldn't get the running game going. Mario had a couple of long runs. Spencer hit a couple balls down the field, but the offense scored, 24 points, and that was just kind of that. If you'd have told me that going in based on the matchup, I would have said that's realistic. I mean, this is a Florida defense that has talent, and I thought this is probably one of the best offensive showings of the year when you consider the opponent and consider the talent you were going up against. And, man, I think worth noting again, and again, we're not trying to relive the Florida game. We're more trying to bring this forward. What did we learn that could have implications moving forward? And Mario Anderson, to me, I don't know if I had this take live, but rewatching the game, I think this was his best game as a Gamecock.
Yeah.
I feel like I watched the Mississippi State game, and then I rewatched the Mississippi State game, and I said, he gives them a chance, but frankly, he left a lot of yards on the field in that game. What was my initial thought? And I thought we all, I thought the fan base was getting a little bit too caught up in, hey, there's finally a running game. Like, where's this guy been? But, and I was like, we're getting a little ahead of this, kind of crowning him, honestly. I was like, I want to see a little bit more. And then Tennessee game, you had the long run, but only 10 carries, not a whole lot of room. You're down 2 scores, hard to get a read. I thought as far as hitting the hole, just making those little nuanced cuts where you kind of avoid a tackler and keep getting forward. Obviously, the hurdle into the end zone was fantastic, but just overall, I think we are seeing Mario Anderson grow before our very eyes. And to me, I'm going, all right, like this guy looks like a lead SEC back. Like he looks like a guy you can build your running game around. And I think you can feel the confidence growing. He did finish the game despite the injury. Beamer said he's fine. So if you're South Carolina, you've gone from kind of what's happening at running back to we need Mario Anderson to be healthy or close to 100% this week if we're going to have a chance. He has become very important to what this offense does.
Yeah, it's been very interesting and fun to watch, frankly. Wes, when we knew going into this season, we kind of knew the picture going in, right? And we knew that it wasn't an ideal picture. I kind of based on the fact that he had a lot of experience and yes, it was Newberry, it was D2, but I did like the skill set in the tape. And I kind of had a feeling that at some point Mario Anderson was probably going to have a say in this running back race. Now, remember the preseason, all the talk behind the scenes was about Dakereon Joyner. And you may say, I was just practice, right? Sometimes things you hear in practice end up translating, right? Like, remember everything that we heard about Spencer Rattler in the offseason, how strong that was. That has come to fruition. We have seen a definite, absolute jump from Spencer Rattler from year 1 to year 2 at South Carolina. Now, what has happened at the running back position? And I think there's a lot of different reasons for it. It's a complex thing, but Dakereon Joyner has not had the year that I think anybody envisioned. Him, the coaching staff, us. Mario Anderson has come along. He's gotten some opportunities. He's taken them. He's run with them. And the skill set that he has translated. And you're right. He looks like he belongs. He doesn't look like a nice story or a fad or a guy that just made a few runs here and there. Like, we've seen some different types of runs from him. We've seen him lower his shoulder. We've seen him take off for 75 yards against an SEC defense. We've seen him hurdle a guy in an SEC defense. And he just seems to be getting more and more comfortable. And I think he's kind of what the doctor ordered for this offense. And maybe some of these schematic changes are too, Wes. So I think here's one key if we're bringing it forward to Missouri. This is bigger picture, but can you go against a team that's playing really well in Missouri and on the road with an offensive line that continues to be banged up, even more banged up than it has been, with a running back in Mario Anderson that got banged up last game? And can you go run the football a little bit? Can you score some points? Because, again, this has been a team that has been a lot different at home than it has been on the road. And so here's your challenge.
Yeah, and also credit where it's due, man. He has highly credited. He did the same earlier this week. He did the same on our Garnet Trust interview. He's given a lot of credit to Montario Hardesty for bringing him along. The way he phrased it is he kind of broke me down and built me back up. And so, I think credit where it's due there. I also thought that, again, big picture thought, but related to Florida, when I rewatched the game, this is the best job I've seen a staff do in a while at finding a role for Juju McDowell and putting him in space and putting him in a situation to go have success. It was a gap scheme run that, like I said earlier, he scored his first touchdown on. They had that little play. I told you earlier, I was trying to figure out the actual football verbiage word for it, where they run that play action down at the goal line and then flip it out to the running back. So it's not really play action because the running back has already vacated that spot, but the quarterback still does the footwork as if it's going to be a play action. So they got him out in space there. There was another play, Chris, that didn't really hit the way it was supposed to, but they had a bunch formation, and then they had Juju starting out spread all the way wide, and then they motioned him to being like behind the bunch and then threw a quick just like kind of a screen out to him with the hopes that the bunch formation was kind of going to operate as a convoy for him basically. So I thought that, Juju's kind of struggled to find room this year, struggled to get going, whether that's his fault or the line or whatever. To this point, he's hung in there. Dow Loggins gave him a ton of credit for continuing to bring the energy, continuing to bring up, a positive mindset to practice. And we saw that pay off with him having a couple of big plays in this game. And I thought that was a key to this offense continuing to find ways to move the ball against Florida this past week.
Yeah, I mean, we saw guys getting involved and making plays, and Juju is a guy that you need to get involved in making plays. I think Amarian Brown's another one, and he's been injured too much this season or limited too much this season for us, to have a firm grasp on that. But I thought the usage for Juju McDowell was the best this season. And I think that was going to be a key, right? Not obviously running Juju McDowell 10 times up the middle, which they haven't done, right? But that's not how you use them. So how can you use them? And I thought it made a lot of sense. We saw Trey Knox being involved. We saw Josh Simon, a very impressive, touchdown catch and run for him. We saw a lot of good, coming off of the bye week. And we saw a Gamecock football team that was, I think we said this earlier on Monday, Wes, their touchdown drives were long, sustained drives. I mean, they were going 75 yards for almost all of them, right? Almost all their scoring drives, I think, were 60-something and 75-yarders. Would you like to see a little more consistency? Sure. But I think all things considered, Dow Loggins, I think, Wes, there's more games to go, but I think he's done a good job with this offense. And it starts with Spencer Rattler, right? Spencer Rattler speaks very highly of Loggins. Rattler's obviously got a lot of talent, but there's a difference between last season and this season. And you look at all the obstacles that this offense has faced to kind of just be finding your footing with the lead back, to have all the injuries at receivers and not, frankly, a lot of backup receivers, rotational receivers that have been contributing in big ways, to have the offensive line issues and injuries and still be able to put together some quality offensive performances, I think has been good. So the next step, again, like I said earlier, can you go turn in a better performance on the road and kind of overcome some of those things?
Yeah, can you do it on the road is definitely the big question, the next step for this offense. Also, rewatching the game, man, I just found myself saying, South Carolina fans, appreciate Spencer Rattler while he's here, because he made some plays in this game that I knew were impressive originally, but you never cease to be wowed by some of the things he can do, whether it's just the velocity in which he can throw the football, whether it's extending plays, making those decisions on when to extend and run, when to extend and throw, when to give up and throw the ball away. There were a couple of those as well that were the correct decisions. So, he's been so good, man. He gives them a chance every single time as long as they can give him some room to operate. But Chris, before we move on from Dow Loggins, he did answer a question about the play calling at the end of the game. Mainly the deep shot, the deep throw that actually could have been picked off. And so this was not the final drive, obviously. This is the drive before that when South Carolina has a 3-point lead. They're holding on. They need basically 2 first downs to potentially be in a chance to really go win the game, or need to just go score and make it a 2-score game. And Loggins, which I thought the thought process here was probably right. You just hope you can execute better. He said, yeah, we were being a little aggressive there because this was an offensive game. Florida. And I thought even to the detail, Chris, that he answered it without saying we knew our defense was struggling, which would have been accurate. One way to say it. It would have been accurate. Maybe that's even what you're thinking, but he said it. Look, we got a tier 1 quarterback on the other side, which I'll admit, Graham Mertz, far better than I gave him credit for being coming in. Yep. We saw why he was an Army All-American in high school. We saw why. And if I'm Florida, I'm crediting, like I'm using that in recruiting. Hey, this guy did this at Wisconsin. He came in here and did this with us. But that's here nor there. The way he framed it, Chris, was, look, man, they're having success on offense. They've got a quarterback who's throwing the ball around. We didn't look at it as run 3 plays and punt and try to make them use their timeouts or run off clock. We looked at it as go score, go get some first downs. It just did not happen that way. So that's why you see, a kind of aggressive throw down the field there. I'm sure Spencer probably wants that one back, but if he hits a ball down the field, then you're saying that was a great call, great call to be so aggressive.
Yeah, because I think you said this after the game. I mean, you're at that point in the game where, the other team knows they've got 3 downs. They need to stop to get the ball back, right? And if you go out there and kind of just run 3 running plays, maybe you gain a couple yards, maybe you lose a couple yards, and then you're punting, right? You're just kind of wasting some time, running time off the clock. And from a strategic standpoint of trying to run plays that were more aggressive, that you felt like might give you a better chance to move the sticks, I think that made sense, especially knowing in hindsight, Wes, what ended up happening. Florida got the ball back a couple times, as improbable as it was, as crazy as it was, with converting, a few 4th down opportunities on those 2 drives, 2 big ones, 4th and 10, 4th and 11. Still, it made sense. Now, was the execution there? Could you have called, some different concepts? Sure, maybe, right? We're in the hindsight, like nitpicking stage, but I certainly don't think you could disagree with the logic of it, right? Like, or you could, maybe you do disagree with the decision, but the logic of it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of, hey, we want to be a little bit more aggressive because we want to try to go score, number one, because we might need another score, or we just want to move the chains and we don't feel like kind of giving ourselves up and say, hey, here's our 3 running plays. We're just basically, playing for a punt. So I think it makes sense.
Yeah, if anything, looking at how it turned out with hindsight, you maybe are saying, I wish I was more aggressive. They were very successful, especially in the first half. This is the other thing that caught my attention. Going play action on first down and just letting Spencer distribute the ball, whether that was downfield, whether that was intermediate, or whether that was underneath. Just letting him go make plays. And Loggins made that point as well. Look, 7 is our best player. And that's the guy that got you there. You want to put it on his shoulders when you have a chance. And, when he was talking about that, Chris, it kind of, as we kind of transitioned to defense and then some special teams, it kind of just reiterated a thought that I've had recently about, hey, what's wrong with this defense? What's going on with this defense? If you say, who's the best player on South Carolina's offense, your answer is either Spencer Rattler or Xavier Legette. But I don't really have to hesitate or process to answer that question. Like,
That's right.
Hey, who are the best players on offense? Rattler and Legette. Like, it's pretty obvious to anybody that watches. And now offense and defense, I know it's not apples to apples. Like, defense is just played differently. It is consumed differently by the fan. You watch it differently. Maybe your best player is a defensive tackle and people just don't notice, But if I say, who are the best players on defense? Who are the elite players on South Carolina's defense? Or let me take it a step further. Who in the 6 games we've seen has played like an elite player on South Carolina's defense? I don't know if there's a guy that I just say, that's him. That's the guy. And I think in this league, you have to have some studs. You have to have some dudes. You have to have the guys. These game deciding plays that we're waiting on South Carolina to make. You just haven't had guys like that. Travis says is your best player on defense, TJ Sanders. so far, your best player on defense is either Jalen Kilgore or TJ Sanders.
That's right. I agree totally.
But
you do have to think about it a little bit more.
Yep. And I still would say, I mean, for a freshman, Jalen Kilgore has been, you can't ask for anything more than him, than what he's given you. And TJ too, man, sort of stepping into a bigger role this year. Hard to ask for much more from him either. And I think best position group actually has been that interior of the defensive line, Boogie, TJ, and Taka. But I just wonder if South Carolina has a lot of good players on defense, but kind of lacks those few great difference makers that you need to be a good defense in this league.
It all comes down to players, and I think look back at the offense even, Wes, at times this year. Like there've been a lot of games where people are analyzing how many, dig routes Dow Loggins is calling, right? And I mean, it matters, right? The coaching and development piece, it 100% matters. Maximizing the roster that you have definitely matters. And I actually think they've done a pretty good job offensively of that, by the way, as I said earlier. But at some point, it's players, right? I saw a quote from Kirby Smart, who right now has the best college football team in the country. Just won 2 straight national titles. And he was talking about gurus, right? Like these coaching gurus, self-proclaimed. Everybody wants to be an RPO guru. He said it's about having, at the end of the day, really good players. And certainly at Georgia, they have very good coaching. They have very good development, evaluations, all that. They're a machine. But they also have the best players, generally. And so a broad point and a smaller point. So let's start with the smaller point. This pertains to the nickel conversation, I think, Wes. Last year, Nick Emanwari was just a safety. This year, he's played some nickel. Past 2 games, he started at nickel. Last year, South Carolina had Darius Rush and Cam Smith, who are now in the NFL. When you lose those guys, the coaches are the same. The scheme's the same, right? Now, we could say the coaches aren't doing as good of a job they could, or they're not maximizing, or they could change things. But what primarily is different? Well, there it's personnel. You don't have a Cam Smith that you can slot in and say, hey, go cover the slot in the last 2 games. That's the smaller point. The bigger point is the best college football teams, yeah, they may have great coaches in development, but they also have the most talent. And so the teams, I've had a lot of people say, well, Duke and Washington State are winning, right? You don't have to have a bunch of 4- and 5-star players. Look at Duke and Washington State. They're having really good years. I give them all the credit in the world. I'll come back on here and eat a huge plate of crow if in 4 or 5 years, Duke and Washington State are in the college football playoff on a consistent basis, right? Ultimately, isn't that what fans want? If you play Power 5 football, you want to compete for your conference. You ultimately want to get in the playoff, especially after it expands. And West, to do that, man, you have got to have a load of talent. Think about to the best South Carolina football teams that you remember. Think about the defense. Think about how many NFL guys are on it. And even on a team that had Jadeveon Clowney on it, we'd have to go, was he best player on the defense? Because you could pick out a few and make an argument for it,
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Travis said this isn't just an us problem. I don't know any defensive player in the country that's been dominant. I think we're talking verbiage right now. Like I'm not saying dominant nationally, like that they are in the Heisman conversation. I'm talking who on South Carolina's defense has been what James Pierce is for Tennessee right now. Who, like, they're dominant to me is like you're the best player on that defense, or you're one of the best 2 or 3 players on that defense, and the other team circles you on the board when they start on your game, and they say, we got to know where that guy is. Hey, we're going to be iffy about testing this cornerback. Everything is on a scale compared to the rest of the SEC. So I think for South Carolina, like you were hoping some of these guys were going to be that, right? And some of them still could be. Xavier Legette, 2023 is not Xavier Legette 2022. Players
18
get better.
catches last year.
Yeah, they get better, they develop, they become better. So this is not dogging anyone, but I just think overall, you miss Cam Smith. Cam Smith, and I don't even know if you call Cam an elite career at South Carolina, but Cam could lock some guys down from time to time. Cam was probably better in coverage than maybe he was given credit for at times. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't follow the other teams quite well enough from a personnel standpoint to just give you examples. But I feel like there's a lot of players on defenses that are on these elite teams or let's even say upper half of the SEC teams that are difference makers defensively. And I just don't know if we've seen that from South Carolina at this point. And I know we haven't seen the depth that some of these other teams have, where you're bringing that next guy in and there's just not quite as much of a drop off from one player to the next.
Yeah, I talked to somebody, Wes, again, after the Florida game, who kind of pointed that out of, hey, South Carolina does have some good players, and this was talking mainly about the defense. Hey, they've got good players like TJ Sanders, Wes, some coaches in the SEC feel like he's one of the better guys in the conference as an individual talent. Jalen Kilgore is going to be he already is and is going to be a really good player. But the problem becomes your depth. And again, you're playing so many snaps. And Boogie Huntley's playing 56 snaps. Tonka's playing 54 snaps. TJ Sanders, kind of a third starter, could come in and play 46, which is a luxury, right? But it's not like you have 6 deep at tackle, in terms of there not being much drop off. You don't even feel great about the edge position. You don't feel great about the linebacker position, In the secondary, obviously they're using mostly the same guys there, and they've shifted those around a little bit. So to your point, the depth in terms of the competitive depth that you need just isn't there at this point. And so again, to bring it back, this goes back to recruiting. I mean, you're going to have to recruit your way out of some of these things. There's not a coach that's going to come in and magically snap a hand and now you have depth. Yeah. You are going to have to recruit it and build it. And then sure, yes, you have to develop it, put it in the right positions.
Yeah. Kendall says player development is the number one issue. Coach the guys up and get them ready. I mean, that's not, but you can't snap a finger. Everybody else is developing their players as well. So, I think some of this is just you're playing in a league that if you are not really, really good at multiple areas, you are going to be exposed. I'll ask it one more way before we kind of move on. How many guys, based on what we've seen through 6 games, if you did an all SEC list, how many guys on South Carolina's defense are in the conversation, for all SEC? I mean, and I'm not talking about just first team. I'm talking about would be in the conversation to be on the list. It's not a ton. Again, right off the bat, offense, Rattler is in the conversation. Easy. Xavier Legette in the conversation. Easy. I would say Gargiulo and Vershawn Lee, just watching them as much as we do, maybe are in the conversation. They're probably not going to maybe get on there. Trey Knox, the way he's played the last couple of weeks, maybe starts to get himself back into that conversation after a slow start. But point being, if you kind of draw that line wherever you want, are we talking all SEC? Are we talking first team? Are we talking solid starter? Carolina just doesn't have as many difference makers, I think, at this point on defense. And that's become more and more apparent to me as we've gone on. All right, Chris, you want to tell everybody about our friend Trey Harrell?
Yeah, let's tell everybody about Trey. And he is your number one option, or should be your number one option, for an auto accident attorney right here in South Carolina. Now, I hope that you were never injured in an auto accident in the Palmetto State. Hope none of your friends are, none of your family are. But if you are, it's a bad place to be, and you need someone on your side. Don't go at it alone. Find an attorney who's going to fight for you. Find an attorney who's going to fight to get what you deserve. Find an attorney who helps. And remember that our friend Trey Harrell helps. You can follow him on social media at Trey Helps, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. He does a really good job of sharing some of his insights and even entertaining you from time to time on social media. Again, that's Trey Helps, at Trey Helps, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Trey Harrell helps folks that are injured in auto accidents all over Gamecock country and all over the state of South Carolina. And Wes, he was actually voted by the readers of the Post and Courier best personal injury attorney. That's at Trey Helps on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, or check out his website, attorneyharrell.com. Thanks to Trey Harrell for helping us bring you GC Live a couple times a week.
No doubt, man. Get our Clint graphic back up here.
How did we just switch locations, by the way?
I don't know. I thought my brain had cut off or something.
This is not. Yeah, I don't like it.
Hold on.
Aha. So much better.
All right. Here we go. We're good. So Travis said Kilgore, Sanders, Boogie. I mean, Kilgore should be freshman. Kilgore should be a freshman All-American, honestly. But Kilgore, Sanders, Boogie with an outside shot. But again, that if you're saying with an outside shot, that's kind of proving the point I'm trying to make. Dial hasn't been bad prior to the missed tackle. And I do. Let me say this. Let's have a nuanced conversation. I've seen Marcelas Dial take quite a bit of, in my opinion, unwarranted heat for his play this year. Again, I stand by my take that there's not been an elite player on this defense through 6 games, but Dial has not played bad. In fact, the numbers say he's having his best year. And so I think it's easy with defensive backs to just remember when they got beat, or just remember when they got a penalty called on them. Well, guess what? If you're a DB, if you're in man coverage, if you're going to pressure up front and leave guys on an island, they're going to get beat from time to time. Those are good receivers as well. And, Ricky Pearsall, in his case, that guy, in my opinion, is a stud. So he's going to win some of those battles on you. So I do think we got to kind of – do they need to be better? Do they need to finish plays as a whole in the defensive backfield? Of course. Nobody – again, we're trying to have a nuanced conversation. But I don't think – I see people say, yeah, like this take, Dial starts nowhere else other than Vandy. That is not true. That is absolutely false. Marcelas Dial has actually been one of their better players on defense this year. So, cornerback, to Travis's point, you only look at the cornerback when they're throwing the ball at him. You're not watching, unless you're pulling up the all 22 and you're watching every single other play where he is covering someone, then I think it's hard. Like, I see people saying Dial shouldn't even be playing right now, which I don't agree with that whatsoever.
I would not recommend trying that strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Wes, in talking pure coverage, I mean, I think you gave these numbers the other day. I mean, PFF has him. And actually, Florida stayed away from Dial with Ricky Pearsall, if that means anything. He was about the only guy on the roster who did not give up a catch to Ricky Pearsall the other day. He's given up 18 catches this season on 29 targets and 2 touchdowns. Those are not horrible numbers. Wes, I almost included this in a piece I did on the Nickels the other day. So you remember how we always tout Cam Smith and him moving to play the slot corner position against Tennessee and how that worked, Tennessee and Clemson. Against Tennessee, he gave up 7 catches and a touchdown. He was still good. They did a great job, all things considered, against Tennessee, and that move was a big part of it. But he gave up 7 catches in the game. They limited things. He gave up a touchdown, shorter touchdown, man-to-man, in position, just got beat. Cedric Tillman called a ball over his head. So, I don't know. And Marcelas Dial played more snaps last season than Cam Smith or Darius Rush. So, now
I think people forget that.
Has he been a first team All-American? No, nobody's saying that. But sometimes like you said, I mean, I remember when people booed Stephon Gilmore in the stadium for getting beat. He might be in the NFL Hall of Fame. He's a pretty good player. So, little perspective probably needed.
Yeah, I think, and there's a huge difference between, hey, I don't know if a guy is elite right now, and saying, oh, he'd start for Vanderbilt and nobody else. Like, that's, Aaron, has he been 4th team All SEC? What is that in reference to? I don't know. Anyway, let's talk. I mean, honestly, I don't think we learned a whole lot new from what we heard from Clayton White today. And I do think we got a little bit of meat on the bone from Pete Limbo, as we always do. And what do you think about the thought, Chris, that what do you think about the thought that other teams, seeing what South Carolina was able to do, have started to copy them on special teams a little bit? Limbo basically said, he didn't say, hey, they're doing what we used to do or what we've always done, but he said Missouri is getting bolder on special teams. He said Missouri has introduced the muddle huddle on special teams, which South Carolina had like half of the muddle huddles that were run in the entire country last year. Said they're getting bold and calling fakes. He even said they ran our fake from I don't remember which game he was referring to, because they
Tennessee, right?
I think that is what he said. Yeah,
I think Beamer said that too.
I mean, or Tennessee 2 years ago, probably.
That's what I meant. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
2 years ago. Yeah. I forgot they did one. Yeah.
So yeah, apparently you better be prepared for Missouri to pull the old fake on you too. But I wonder if some of these SEC teams are saying, hey man, they're still in possessions over there. Let's get bold and copy it. I mean, that's the way football works. When somebody has success with something, teams do try to copy you.
Yeah, make it more important. It certainly has been an impact. Well, I think just a general point about the game, last year, Wes, we talked about going in. Okay, obviously South Carolina's special teams at that point, they've been pretty dynamic, right? More dynamic than what we've seen this year. Overall, more solid than what we've seen this year, even. And going into that game, Missouri's goal was just kind of play South Carolina even on special teams. Don't give up any big plays. Don't give up big returns. Hey, for Missouri, we may not have any big returns of our own. We may not really make any plays, but just play South Carolina even. And they did. And in a game where Missouri controlled the tempo offensively, had a great game plan, and then defensively just shut Carolina down, that made a difference because South Carolina did not then have that differentiator of stealing a possession, right? Or going from fourth down and you're about to punt to now you got a first down, you got an opportunity to go make something happen or even get a score off of a fake. Missouri played them even. So fast forward now to this year, they seem to be getting more bold, more aggressive, as Limbo said. So I'll be keeping Wes a close eye on it, in this game. Not even just, hey, will one side try to make a big play on special teams, but can South Carolina return to making this more of an advantage, whether it's just hidden yards, right? Kai Kroger against the Gators, he bombed an early punt, but there were a couple that he certainly would want back. And Limbo referenced that and just how they're working on some things in practice as well to try to improve that.
You once again, as you kind of always do, got some, I thought, pretty intricate details from Pete Limbo, Chris, and he was asked about what is going on with Kai Kroger, and he gave some details on the actual technique and specifically what is going on with him. And I thought it was very interesting. He said that basically his drop has been a little bit off, and I imagine it's kind of one of those things. It's like playing golf. It's like hitting in baseball or softball. One little thing that maybe you haven't even ever thought about because you just naturally did it correctly before, one little sort of tweak can be off and it can mess you up. So, I've never even thought twice about mechanics for punters, but it makes sense if you're dropping the ball and your drop is a little bit off, but the rest of your mechanics are the same, you're going to miss hit it from time to time. So it's been weird to see the little bit of the inconsistencies from Kai, just because we've seen him so early in his career be so consistent. And you almost just I feel like Kai almost reached one of those points where you kind of forgot he was a human. Like, humans are going to make mistakes. Like, you kind of just, he's going to execute. He always does. And so it has been a year, I feel like, of a little bit of kind of having to deal with some adversity for Kai. But, I think Limbo did the right thing too, and pointing out, hey, this is my guy. He's a dude. He's an athlete. He's going to work hard to fix it. He'll get it turned around. But yeah, frankly, it hasn't been as consistent as we are used to seeing from Kai.
No, it hasn't. And that was actually, Wes, kind of a goal, right? As good of a year as he had last season, you can look at the Clemson game, right? Like, that's not every game for Kai Kroger. That's not every game for any punter. That was an absolutely amazing performance. And that can't be the standard that's set. But unfortunately, when that happens, that kind of becomes stamped like that. That's it. This is every game. This is what it should be like. And so actually, instead of being a little bit more consistent, it's actually gone in the other direction, Wes, and been more inconsistent. So in some ways, it's the victim of your own success thing. Like, people set the super high standard for you. I know Pete Limbo has high standards. Kai Kroger has high standards for himself. I think he'll be fine. They've clearly identified some things that they need to work on. So we'll see what happens, the back half of the season. What does it look like? If I had to bet, Wes, I'm certainly betting on Kai Kroger, returning to form. Not the Clemson game every game. We're not going to see that every single game, but returning to form and just finding some more consistency.
For sure, man. That can be a weapon. I think if you're South Carolina, still Chris's phrase here, when you have these low margins, then your margin for error is so small, you want to find that advantage anywhere you can get it. And I think some of this, talk about special teams not necessarily being quite as much of a weapon so far for them. Some of this is we knew there was going to be a lot of turnover among the guys who were playing for South Carolina on special teams. The other part of it, could it be that teams are so hyper aware of you on special teams that it's a little bit more difficult to pull these fakes or kind of catch them off guard? We've seen them still hit a few of those, but for the most part, teams are incredibly aware of what Limbo and Boomer and all these guys have been able to do as far as that part of the game. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle to keep an eye on as well. Thought it was interesting. He talked about Luther Burden and just how aggressive he is, Chris, as a punt returner.
Yeah, Luther Burden is a problem, man. And, this is funny. Eli Drinkwitz actually fielded a question at his press conference saying that against Kentucky, Luther didn't have his best game. And Eli Drinkwitz was annoyed because he said, what? Because he didn't have 100 yards? This is a guy that earlier this season, Wes, you compared what Luther Burden had done versus Devontae Smith's big season at Alabama, and it was like on par, just had a great year. So this happens everywhere. But he's super dangerous with the ball in his hands. He can beat you downfield. He can beat you in the open field. And, of course, he can beat you on special teams. He's going to be extremely aggressive. You can't assume that he's going to just let a ball bounce, right? I mean, you've really got to be on it. And you can't miss a tackle on him, right? If you get a shot, you better corral him. You better get him down. You better slow him up until help arrives.
Good grief, man. 56 catches already for 808 yards for Luther Burden. Then you add in Theo Weiss, who, as Shane Beamer mentioned, former Oklahoma guy, he's got 34 catches for 400 yards. And even Brady Cook, man, I mean, we want to talk about the year, rightfully so, that Spencer Rattler has had. Brady Cook having a huge year for these guys as well. Over 2,000 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. He's been fantastic, this offense for them. Cody Schrader doing his part at running back as well, 648 yards on the ground. So we'll dive into what all that may mean and if there's a path to a win for South Carolina on Friday. But certainly early indications are that this is a tough matchup for South Carolina. I want to talk recruiting real quick, but first, I'm going to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax. Give them a call today. The tax team at Liberty Tax is there for you if you have back tax returns you haven't filed, if you have debt to the IRS. If you played IRS roulette and lost, there's no blame, there's no shame. Go to nice folks here locally, and they'll help you get things straightened out. Convenient locations, friendly staff. The tax team at Liberty Tax is located in Irmo, Columbia, and Lexington. You can give them a call at 803-462-5576, and they're going to take care of you just like they did Chris. Liberty Tax team right here in the Columbia area, 3 convenient locations. So South Carolina, it seems, likes to mine the junior colleges for defensive linemen, Chris, who are originally from the Palmetto State. And this is somebody that you had mentioned before, I believe, for fans to keep an eye on. The offer officially goes through Jerome Simmons from Highland Community College in Kansas currently, but originally from Bamberg, Earhart, an area that is very familiar to South Carolina fans. They've had some dudes out of that place, some greats to line up in the Garnet and Black. But what can you tell everyone about Jerome Simmons?
Yeah, we knew that JUCO D tackle would be a possibility this year, Wes. A smaller number overall. You don't want to reach at the high school level in this class and get yourself in a bad position. So portal or junior college or a combo of both, seems to be more likely. Question just becomes who. So the portal, we don't know. Jerome Simmons is a guy from Bamberg Earhart, which has produced, of course, A.J. Cann, K.C. Crosby, 6'4", 300-pounder. He's having a nice year for Highland Community College, 4.5 sacks this season so far through several games. And big kid, Travian Robertson called him up, offered him. Georgia's offered as well. He'll probably visit there in December. Really seems to like the idea of playing at home. Grew up going to South Carolina games. Seems like he rooted for the Gamecocks growing up, Wes. So we'll see where this one goes. But this is definitely a name now to monitor, who's a Palmetto State guy with an offer, who may be interested in playing at home, and is a guy that kind of fits the mold of what South Carolina is looking for.
No doubt. Good stuff, man. All right, we're at an hour right now, so we're going to hop on off here. As always, tomorrow will be the afternoon drive with Mike Uva, and then on Friday we'll close it out with our final thoughts on South Carolina versus Missouri. You got any more thoughts, Chris? Or are you good?
That's it for me, man.
All right, he's Chris. I'm Wes. Appreciate y'all joining in. Appreciate all the comments. Stay with us here. Hit the subscribe button on any and all your podcast platforms because we're on all of them. Subscribe on YouTube and come check us out on GamecockCentral.com. Also, download the app if you want to get notifications on South Carolina news. You can download the On3 app and then select South Carolina as your team. The app is free. And you can also choose whether you want all news alerts or whether you want just breaking news alerts. So check that out today. Pretty cool technology. For Chris, I'm Wes. See y'all soon.